Welcome to Waters. We're going to talk a little bit about native plants and low water use plants. And if any of you have lived in Prescott for any length of time, we can go from boiling hot temperatures in the 90s to cool temperatures near freezing in just a matter of hours. So we have to have plants that are tough that can take that. So I've gathered a few of my favorites, and I've got quite a selection of things for you, whether you're looking for full sun or shade. But the very first thing I want to start out with is the soil. Prescott soils can vary from sandy to pure granite. So if you have good drainage, that's basically the best thing that you need for desert plants, because they can tolerate dry conditions, but they don't usually like to sit in a pool of water. So the number one thing you can do is to check your drainage and assure that you do have draining soil. If you're in a rock spot and it's just a little too hard to dig a little bit bigger, and you can add some aggregate to the bottom so there's an escape route for the water. I like to fill a hole with water and see how long it takes it to perk. Perk means for the water to dissipate or go down. So what we like to do is fill that hole with water and wait. How long does it take? If you're in the sand, it's just a matter of moments. Within 10 minutes, the water is gone. But in some of these other spots where you have a high caliche, or perhaps maybe darn cactus bit me. I might have to move in. If you have a lot of caliche or clay, sometimes that water will pool for a long time, or if you've actually dug a hole in a rock, that water might sit for a long time. Basically, our window is 12 hours. If you fill that hole with water and it takes longer than 12 hours for the water to perk out or to leach out, you want to think of another spot. These guys just don't want to sit in that kind of water. If you have a drainage issue, we can solve that by digging deeper holes, adding some inorganic aggregate, sand, gravel, something that will not decompose. A lot of people have a tendency to dig a hole really deep, and in order to set that plant at the right planting level, they're going to add mulch underneath it. Well, what happens to that mulch when it starts to decompose? It goes away. If the plant is sitting on top of mulch and the mulch goes away, the plant's going to sink. If the plant sinks, then it's down in the bottom, and where's the water going? Right into the crown of that plant. These guys all like to sit right above and let the water run outward. So your best bet is to use non-organic, inorganic. That means sand, gravel, native soil, anything that isn't going to break down. If it breaks down into smaller pieces, so maybe you have rocks that are decomposed granite, it's going to break down into smaller chunks of granite, it's still granite, it's still there. It's not going to just disappear. But if it's got carbon in it, like bark, mulch, manure, any of those things that came from something that was once living, it's going to eventually decompose and go away and leave a void. Voids equal sinking holes. These guys don't want to sit in sinking holes. They want to sit on the top of a little bit of a mound so the water can go away. So we've dug our hole, we've perked it out. Within 12 hours, the water is gone. We've got a good spot to plant in. We still want to practice the same planting procedures we would with other things. We want to mix a little bit of good organic material on the backfill where the roots are going to expand. We want the plant to sit in its normal spot, but in order to encourage those roots to spread out, because that's what makes drought-tolerant plants so drought-tolerant, is they have massive root structures. So we want to encourage those roots to spread outward. How do we do that? We amend that soil. Some people on your drier plants will amend it with a little bit of sand, or they can actually buy a cactus mix. If you see on the end there, I've got the cactus mix from Grow Well. It's a nice blend of soil that has vermiculite and other highly draining particles in it. So what it does is it creates air pockets for the roots to grow into. If you want to mix your own, you can use mulch and add sand or vermiculite yourself. Some people will just use pumice stones or small gravel and mix it in. But what that does is it creates gaps. We don't want the plant to go from rich soil in its nursery container to sad natural soil here in Prescott, so we create a transition zone, and that's where that amendment comes in. We create a transition by adding something different than what the native soil has to offer. That way we have really rich soil in the center of the root ball when the plant comes out of its nursery container. Say that 10 times fast. Pull it out of its nursery container, it's rich. Look at the soil. I'm gonna pull this guy out, and you can see how black and rich that is. That's good looking soil. If you've looked at Prescott's native dirt, it doesn't look like that, does it? It's sandy, sometimes it's rocky, but it doesn't have a lot of organic in it. So this plant, he likes that organic stuff. He's like, ooh, this is good, I'm gonna grow here. There's lots of food, there's lots of moisture, there's lots of stuff. The only thing it's missing is space. So we give it space by putting it in our native soil, but the plant says, ew, this doesn't taste good. It doesn't have anything in it for me. That's where the amendment comes in. So if you're digging your hole the same size as your nursery container, basically all you're doing is planting that container, that plant, into a smaller in-ground container. We want to make that hole bigger, 2 to 3 times the size, and in some cases even larger. If you have poor drainage, dig a wider soil hole. That depth needs to be set at the same for the plant when it's in the ground, but if you have drainage issues, dig it deeper and add some inorganic aggregate underneath. Gravel, sand, whatever you want to put underneath, and then mix your backfill with your good rich stuff. We want to add about 1/3 amendment to 2/3 native. That way the plant doesn't get too spoiled in its little hole and it'll start to reach out. Because the key to a healthy plant is healthy roots, and drought tolerant plants have the best roots of them all. We talked about soil, we talked about soil amendments. Once the plant gets in the ground, even the natives do require a little bit of food. Anytime you bring in a plant that's not indigenous to that particular spot, you have an empty spot, you're putting a plant in, technically you're importing a plant. Even if you just moved it from 10 feet over there, you've moved it. So in order to make it adjust to its new spot, we want to make sure it's getting everything it needs. We've interrupted the rooting process, so we want to make sure that we're stimulating that root process to recover what was lost. That's where your root and grow comes in. It stimulates that root development, gets that plant going. We want to add a little bit of food so it has the nutrients it needs. Now sometimes your organic soil has lots of good rich stuff in it, but we all know Prescott isn't rich in organic. So when we add organic soil, we also want to add a little bit of fertilizer because the fertilizer is already in a small form that the plant can take. If it hasn't decomposed yet, the plant can't use it. But the fertilizer, when you take it out of its container, you'll see there's some little granules and there's some really fine dusty particles. Those fine dusty particles are already to be water soluble. They're gonna suck up into the water and then the plant can use it. It's gotta be in an ionic state for the plant to take it. And if you don't remember what ionic means from high school chemistry, it means it's broke down into its basic parts and has become part of a solution. If it's dissolved in the water, the plant can use it. If it's not dissolved in the water, it's just gonna sit there, just like a rock. The plant might use the rock for protection, but it's not gonna use it for food. So we've talked about feeding, we've talked about our hole, and there's a couple of things you can do to maintain things, because whenever you make a nice environment, I mean, this is beautiful. We want to stay around all these plants because it's cooler, it's prettier. Plus, there's food in the plant. So who's going to come in there? We're going to get birds. We're going to get butterflies. We're going to get other critters. But we're also going to get insects. So if you have a problem with insects, and I noticed there was some webbing on this cactus earlier, I just kind of wiped them off with a pen. I just kind of pulled the webs away. But if you've got an actual infestation of bugs where they're causing damage to your plant, and the plant is struggling. When I say struggling, you look at the plant and half of the plant is demolished, the other half is just kind of peeking. To me, that says, I need some help. That's where your insect control comes in. So we have the small bottle right here. That's the Waters multi-purpose insect control, and if I can reach around this cactus, I'll lift it up for you all. I just don't want to get bitten again. Multi-purpose insect control. This is permethrin. Permethrin is a synthetic compound that mimics pyrethrin, which is the organic that comes from chrysanthemums. So this is a pretty safe chemical for us to use, for humans. It's also the same product that you spray on your horses or your dogs if you want to control bugs. This is a 2.5% concentrate. You're going to follow the label instructions and dilute it anywhere from 1/2 to 2 tablespoons per gallon. And you're going to spray it until it drips off the plant. Once it's dry, it's relatively safe for basically anybody. I would say keep it away from cats. I've read somewhere that permethrin and pyrethrin is not good for cats. But for dogs, humans, horses, and most of your other mammals, it's not going to hurt anybody. But it's very toxic to bugs. With that said, there are some bugs that we like and there are some bugs that we don't. If they're chewing on your leaves, we don't really like them. If they're visiting the nectar in our flowers, we like them. Who doesn't like to see a butterfly come in and feed off of the nectar on their flowers? So if you've got a plant that you're using for a nectar source, or if it's a host plant for some kind of butterfly, keep this away from those parts of the plant that the beneficial insects are using. Only use it on the things that you need to. It is safe to use up until day of harvest on human edible products, herbs, veggies, fruit. It's fine for you and I, just rinse it off, but it's very toxic to insects. It will keep these guys looking nice and happy if they ever get an invasion. The last thing I have next to them is the product. These are called Aquaboost crystals, and these kind of draw moisture. They have polymers in there, so it's a combination of mycorrhizae and polymers. In here you'll see little gray particles. The gray particles are actually silicone, and they swell up with water, and then they release it slower. So if you're going in an area that's really sandy and you want to draw a little bit of moisture in there and you don't have a lot of organic material, mix these in and it'll keep the moisture at the root zone where these are applied. They'll last for about 3 years in the soil, and by 3 years, your plant should be very well established. Last but not least, I have the mulch on the ground over there. I'm not going to lift that dude, he's too big. But I'm sure every one of you who have bought plants from here before is familiar with the mulch. It's basically organic material that has been broken down into smaller pieces. You can use it as a top dressing or as a soil amendment. It's a great deal to use. I buy more mulch than I buy anything, and I buy a lot of stuff, but mulch is my number one. I use it as top dressings, I use it as backfills. I even use the bags. I'll put the bags up against pipes that I don't want to freeze in the wintertime. It's just really insulative, and it's very, very resourceful in an organic garden. If you don't want to use a lot of chemicals, it's going to draw heat, it's going to draw a little bit of food, it's going to draw a lot of protection. It's my number one favorite thing you're going to do if you're going to buy a plant. Got to get at least 1 bag of mulch. After we've talked about all these, what to do in your soil and where to plant, most of Prescott is fairly sunny. However, we do have areas that don't get a lot of sun. So there are some low water or native plants that don't require a lot of sunlight. And for those of you who have that particular joy in your yard of having a shady spot and you want to brighten it up with some plants, when you look at most of these, they really want some sunlight. They're not going to be very happy. But I did draw 3 native or drought tolerant plants that actually like the shade. So number 1, I'm going to walk over here, is the spreading yew. Yews are very toxic, so most critters won't eat them. Very low water needs, and they can grow in absolute no sunlight at all. They are fine without any light. Great plant, and you can see it's beautiful. Plus it's evergreen, and some yews actually this time of year will have little red berries on them. Don't be tempted to eat them, very toxic, but beautiful. Great low water, low light plant. Behind it, this taller one, is the lily of the valley, or the Pieris. And if you want to spell it, it's P-I-E-R-I-S. These can get some good height to them, however, they aren't very fast in growth. This little guy here has got some little opening. These are buds. They're going to bloom into little flowers, little bell-shaped flowers. They're not quite ready yet. It's a little early for them, but they are also an evergreen, and you'll get good, rich color on their leaves and pretty blossoms in the cool months. And then the last one I have on this little cart here is this kind of holly looking. This is Goshiki false holly. It's an osmanthus. It looks like holly because it has that shape of leaf, but it technically is not. And look at the color in that. If you had a dark shady spot, he would show up on his own. That variegation of color draws your eye, the contrast. So you've got a dark plant like the yew highlighted with the mottled pattern of the Goshiki false holly. All 3 do not require sunny spots. They can grow in shady spots. They don't need hardly any water at all, and they're all evergreen. So this would be a great foundation for a shady garden, and then you can tuck some of your colorful blooming plants underneath it, maybe some pansies or something like that, to draw you some seasonal flowers. This would be the bones of a shady, low water garden. Another plant that can grow in lower light is this one here, and I imagine most of you have this already in your yard or have walked past it in somebody else's. It looks like a holly also. This is actually a mahonia. This is the Oregon grape or grape holly. It's another evergreen. What I like about this plant is in the cooler temperatures, it tends to get a little bit of a purple hue to it, and I like color. They'll get berries on it that tend to turn it kind of a blue color. Very neat, low water plant. Can grow in the sun, can tolerate low light, evergreen, and most critters won't eat it. This is sort of my transition plant. He's one that can go in both places, much like a lot of your boxwoods and your euonymus. They don't have to have a lot of sunlight, but they can take some sunlight. This guy here doesn't have to have a lot of sun, but he can take the sun. He's a nice transition, evergreen, low water. Underneath him, I've got a couple of small junipers, and I like to get contrasting colors. Junipers are a staple to a drought-tolerant or a native garden because they can do a lot on very little. Very little water once they're established. I know there are people who have them in their yards that don't ever water them, but they're 10, 15-year-old plants. They do tend to kind of take over the place, so stick with the right variety. If you're looking for colors that are gold, you want to go with Sea of Gold, or Gold Star, or did I ever say Sea of Gold? I think I already did. But either way, those are really good yellows. And yellow and blue are great contrasts, so I like to put a blue next to them. Blue Star, Blue Rug, Blue Chip, any of those, and you get that pretty contrast. So who needs flowers if you have good contrasting foliage? Hardly any water needed. Some of these junipers will stay within a couple of inches height and spread up to 8 feet. And some junipers are tall like a tree. How many of you have seen an alligator juniper in your yard? Big trees, old trees. How much water do they need? Are you watering yours? No. So they don't need a lot. They're great, and they come in any size, any shape, and a variety from yellow to blue to green. Very nice plant. Good transition. I mentioned a tall tree. This isn't a juniper. Does anybody know what this is? Anybody? Anybody? I hear crickets.
Yeah.
This is a deodar cedar, but this is not your standard deodar cedar. A standard deodar cedar is kind of a blue-gray to green color. This is the aria or the golden, and I picked it because I like, again, that color contrast. The new growth has that golden look on it, and look how beautiful it looks up against the striking green and then the red of the changing colors on the sumac. So you can bring lots of interest to a low water garden by picking the right plant. We already talked about getting the right soil, so now let's get the right plants. If you don't want the yellow, go with the standard. Deodar cedars come anywhere from the feeling blue, which is about a 4-foot tall bush that spreads out, and he looks like somebody poured water on him. Or you have your great big tall 40 to 50 foot deodar cedar California Christmas tree. Big, striking, very ornamental, just good looking tree, not hardly any water needed. The number one killer of these guys in Prescott is overwatering. You're not going to kill these by too little of water unless it's a new plant. If it's an established plant and you're having problems, I would check to see if it's getting enough drainage and enough air in the root zone. Beautiful plant, probably my favorite tree, the deodar cedar. The golden if you want a little smaller plant and a little color variation. Now this striking guy over here, everybody's got to be wondering, what the heck is that pretty red thing? That is a sumac. We carry about 3 different types of sumac here at Waters. Occasionally we'll get another one. I think we have 4 sumacs right now. That is called tiger eye sumac. It's not a very tall plant, but it is a true native. If you were to hike in the canyons around here, you would find sumac. You might find the low-growing, fragrant 3-leaf sumac. You might find a tiger eyes, or you might find a staghorn. Staghorn is a taller plant, tends to grow very multi-trunked, almost like a hedge. Not, I would say, maybe 10 to 15 feet. In a really wet spot, it might get up to 20, but it's a very, very indigenous, low water, and nothing beats the color, the fall color on a sumac. Unfortunately, the color on those guys only lasts for a short time because once the leaves drop, that's it till next year. The neat thing about them though is because they're used to the environment here, they can take the cold winters, they can take the hot summers, they don't need a lot of extra, and they'll pop up in places that you didn't really suspect them to pop up. You plant one of those and 10 feet over there, you're gonna find them. When their roots start to spread out, they're gonna pop up in other places. If you have a lot of space and you wanna fill it in, sumac is a great plant with lots of color, and it's one of those passive solar type plants. Put it on the south side of a building, it'll make shade in the summer, but in the winter when the leaves are gone, the sunlight from the solar energy can heat the house since there's no leaves blocking it. So great passive solar, low water, and it'll pop up in places that you weren't expecting it if you want to have a good spreader. If you have a small yard and you want to keep it contained, there are ways around that, but I have to say, give him some space because he needs it. If you didn't want him to get big, then plant him in a smaller container and then set that container in the ground, and that'll keep him from spreading out too much. So in front of the sumac, actually let's go just the other side. What is that green thing next to it? That evergreen with the nice arcing branches. Does anybody know what that is?
Pyracantha?
No, but very close. They actually look very similar. Pyracantha has thorns. I like this one because he's not thorny. I tend to get lots of battle wounds from plants that bite me. That is a cotoneaster, and that is the native one. That is I call it parnii, it might be perii, but if you were to type it in either way, Google would fix it for you. That's a great native. I like the arcing form on it. I've seen people prune it into round balls, and it's okay. It looks to me a little bit awkward. I'm more of a native kind of just let it go, be natural, go with the flow kind of feel. So I like the loose arc on the branches. Some people like the more formal, cut it, let it, doesn't matter. Happy evergreen, most critters won't eat it. I've seen those as tall as the side of a building, so 10 to 15 feet tall, and every bit as wide as they are tall. Great plant, puts on a white flower with a little red berry, low water. I like the silver on one side of the leaf and the dark green on the other. It's just a good striking background plant. The other cool thing about cotoneaster, you can buy that native that's gonna get big, or you can get the small one. If you look just in front of him, you'll see a little low guy. That's also cotoneaster. That one only gets like 3 inches tall. So big or small, we got them all, right? We said that about junipers, you can say that about cotoneaster. Same thing. And then I threw in some color. We've got some euphorbia down there. Now euphorbia isn't a native to Prescott by any means. I've seen some spurge, which is in the euphorbia family. It's also, but it's not those particular varieties. Not a true Prescott native, but a desert native. We've got the Ascot rainbow, which is the kind of orange and yellow green striped guy. Not really a flower plant, more of a foliage plant. And then right behind him, you've got the purple one. Those are both euphorbias, great little accents. They look like that all year round. If you notice the taller one, the purplish guy has little bracts on top. They're different color. That's its flower. Both euphorbias, actually both of those euphorbias will do that. And usually they do it in the cooler months, so sometimes you'll see them in the spring. How many of you have seen a gopher plant? There, I see a few hands. Gopher plant is also a euphorbia. That one gets a little bit larger and it kind of spreads. These guys are great little accents because they stay smaller. The Ascot rainbow is going to get about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet, and then the dark one behind it, I can't remember his name, but it's also euphorbia. He's going to be a little bit leggier, but not quite as wide. Great little accents if you want to put them in front to contrast something, or if you have a pot or a small bed. I've seen a lot of people have a walkway in between the sidewalk and their front porch, and they have this little narrow bed, maybe 1.5 feet wide. Perfect spot for some euphorbias or for some sedums. And the sedums are the other guys right in front of it. Angelina is the green one, and the other one is called bronze carpet. They are all evergreen. So even in the winter months when everything else goes dormant, those little guys still have life in them. We can get a really cool native garden, low water use garden that is also interesting in the wintertime. We don't have to go with all these flowering plants and then see it go sad and boring in the winter. We can add accents. So speaking of flowers, how many of you have a autumn sage in your yard? I imagine most people have one. They're great. Autumn sages in some places will actually stay evergreen because it doesn't get cold enough for them. At my place, it dies all the way to the ground. It's a little colder. But it's a tough plant. It comes back every year. That plant flowers on new growth. So if you're leaving your autumn sage big all winter long and you don't cut him back, you're actually delaying the bloom on that plant. It's best to actually reduce it every year by at least 50%. You can cut it all the way down or you can cut it halfway down. But what that's going to do is it's going to stimulate new growth. And that new growth is where your flowers come from. And how many of you have the autumn sage because of the flower? Why not? It draws hummingbirds, it draws lots of color, and that thing starts blooming early. You'll start seeing blooms on that March, April, May, all the way through until now. I mean, here we are in the middle of September, getting to the end of September, and the autumn sage is still going. It is a great plant. Hardly any water needed. The problem with that is don't overwater. It'll get wet on the inside and it'll start to look hollow. If you have an autumn sage at home and it has green leaves on the tips but nothing on the inside, you're overwatering that plant. Let them get some air into the root zone. During the monsoon season, when we get lots of rain that falls to the ground and kind of sets everywhere because the ground is saturated, that's when you need to really make sure that these plants have the drainage that they need. Create a channel for the water to escape or plant that plant slightly above grade. Move the mulch away. That rock mulch does not breathe at all. Open it up, pull that rock mulch away so that air can get in and those plants will be a lot happier. Autumn sage is a great plant, but it doesn't want to sit in its own water. Okay, next to the autumn sage, I have to reach over and see what I have. Did I get everybody over there? I think I got everybody. Is there anyone I didn't mention on this side? I can't see very well from over here. So now we're going to hop over here. Cactus. True Arizona native. Most people, no matter where they're from, if you say you're from Arizona, this is what they're going to think about. They're going to think of cactus. Whether it's a giant saguaro, which isn't going to grow here, or a prickly pear. Prickly pear is beautiful blooms, evergreen plant, and I would say once it's established, it only gets watered by nature. One of these things you can water once a month, and that might even be too much. Just let them do their thing. They're going to look nice and plump. If they're not getting enough water, they'll actually look deflated. If they're getting too much water, then you'll start to see a kind of a rotting pattern on the inside. They'll be yellow. So keep an eye on your cacti. Again, drainage, drainage, drainage. Cactus also needs some sunshine. So if you have a cactus that's borderline hardy and you think that you're doing it a favor by bringing it into the house and you water on the same schedule as you're watering your house plants, you're going to hurt that cactus. He wants to dry out in between. When I bring my fragile ones in, they go in my daughter who's off to college, her old room, and they go in there and I shut the door. And then they don't ever get watered until I remember to bring them out. So they're getting watered like once every 2 to 3 months in the house. Outside, they're going to get rain, they're going to get whatever they need. If it's a new plant, I would water it at planting, and then I would probably do it on a once every 2 to 4 weeks until it gets established. Cacti are really easy, however, very edible. And who would think, who wants to eat that with all the spines? But if you have any cacti in your yard, you know the javelina go right through that, not a problem. Prickly pear is actually sold in grocery stores. People can eat it. Just get the spines off, the little blockheads, I think is what they're called. If you happen to get them in you and you can't pull them all out, duct tape works good. Or a little Elmer's glue. Get the white glue, rub it on, let it dry, and then peel it right off. It'll grab most of those and take them out of there. And then, of course, washing with an antiseptic when you're done to make sure any germs that might be stuck to those come out. But I like cactus. They're really pretty. They're very easy. It's one of those plant it and forget it kind of plants. Next to that, we have the yucca. Yuccas are awesome because we like to see something kind of interesting. They have great structure. Their form on them is really interesting. But now the yuccas don't just come in that red color. You know, we've got these kind of pinkish red ones out there. Then we have this bright red one called brake lights. And the one I brought up today is actually yellow. So when it gets that stalk that comes up and the little flowers start to open, this is going to have yellow flowers on it. So if you want to bring a little more interest to your garden, but you don't want to do a lot of work, get yourself some yuccas, find yourself some brake lights or some yellow to complement the standard red that you might already have. The yellow and brake lights are a little bit smaller than your big natural red yuccas, but they're still beautiful. You can find a soft leaf yucca that has a flatter leaf that's a little bit broader, and it produces a white flower. So you can go all succulents and all natives in a really hot, sunny, well-drained garden and have no maintenance at all, maybe throwing some food out there every once in a while, turning the sprinklers on or the emitters on if God hasn't given us any rain. And when I say hasn't given us any rain, I'm talking if you go a month of dry conditions over 80 degrees, I would probably give them a drink. Once a month ain't too bad. Right behind it, I have butterfly bush. Awesome, awesome plant. Like the salvia though, the butterfly bush blooms. Say that one 10 times fast. It blooms on new wood, new growth. So cutting these guys down is actually helping them. I like to cut mine down every year, sometime around Valentine's Day, sometime between Valentine's and St. Patty's, depends on the weather. If it's warm, I'll go out there early. If it's cold, I'll wait till later. But the blooms on these guys need to come from the new growth. So leaving that old stuff on there isn't doing you any good unless you want that big structure. This is Miss Ruby. She's gonna get to be about 4 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. We have some dwarfs that are called Lo and Behold. I don't know if we have them now, but we'll see them in the spring. They only get like 1 foot to 2 feet tall and then more of a spreading habit. We get miniatures that have small blossoms, and then we get something like the Dark Knight that gets really tall, 6, 8 feet tall. I've seen some almost 10 feet tall because they've just gotten so tremendous and big. But like the salvia, they also like drainage, low water. When you're planting a new plant, you can water it, not a problem, as long as it's not pooling. But once that plant gets established, the more you water it, he starts to get hollow inside. You'll see that yellowness. How many of you noticed those yellow leaves on the inside of your plant? Those yellow leaves on the inside is the plant defoliating, trying to get some more air to its center, to its core. Moisture equals problems in drought plants. You're going to draw more insects, you're going to have leaf drop. These guys like to dry out in between. The key to that is, again, with your soil and your drainage. Picking the right plant for the right spot, dry, sunny. 6 hours or more of bright light. It can grow in direct sun, south facing, west facing, windy, hot, miserable, but you put him on the north side without any light and he's going to be very unhappy. Next to that we have yarrow. Yarrow is a true native. This is something you will find out walking around. I love yarrow. Yarrow is super hardy. It'll grow as cold as Flagstaff. It'll grow as hot as some of your places down near Wickenburg and Phoenix. Yarrow likes the heat, it likes well drainage, and that particular variety, the moonshine or moon glow, it's going to have the yellow blossoms that are flat, great little landing pads for butterflies and bees. They can land right on top and sip the nectar right out of the flowers. It's got kind of a ferny foliage. This one's more of a gray silver. And in a lot of places around here, you'll still see that even in the winter months. It'll slow down the bloom, but you'll still see the foliage. In Flagstaff, where it's a little bit colder, it actually kind of dies down. But even at my place in Paulden, where it's much colder, I still have that foliage all the time. Very well drained. Yarrow also has some medicinal properties. I'm not an apothecary type person, but I've read that yarrow is used for something. Didn't sink in, but I remember that much. Next to it, we have Apache plume. Apache plume, another native. So you're going to find that in Prescott. You take a walk up in the hill, you're going to come across Apache plume. You're going to come across juniper. You're going to come across some types of cotoneaster. But the Apache plume is really cool because of that paintbrush looking flower it gets. It produces the little white petal flower followed by that plume. That's why it's called Apache plume. And it looks great up against silver foliage. That's why I stuck him next to the juniper. It's not what I would call an evergreen. If it's in a warm spot, it'll keep some of the green foliage. If it's in a cold spot, it will not. At my house, that thing looks dormant. It'll have a little bit down in the bottom, but for the most part, the outside dies back. So I cut it pretty hard. And every year, it gets a growing again. If you're in a warm spot, you're not going to have that die back. You're going to have it stay nice and green. The blooms are going to happen when the temperatures aren't as hot as summer. So you're talking like spring and after the monsoon rains have settled down a little bit in the fall. That's why we've got blooms on it now. But you'll also see it blooming in the springtime. A patchy plume. You can cut it, keep it trimmed into a smaller, denser little guy, or you can let it grow into a bush, sitting about 6 feet across, about 6 feet tall, big, significant, low water, let it drain, let it live in the sun. And then next to that, of course, the juniper. That's one of those in-betweens. We have the really low creeping guys, then we have the in-betweens, and then we have the great big alligators. Well, this is a Wichita blue. If you don't like the blue color, if you want a green one, look for a Spartan. The Spartan is very similar in shape and habit, but instead of being that blue, dusty color, it's gonna be a green, a true green. They're gonna be probably 5 to 6 feet across and probably 10 feet tall. I've seen some almost 15 feet. Again, it has to do with the environment that it's in. I found some critters do like to kind of hide in the junipers. Lots of birds and things like that will nest in them, bunnies. But for the most part, most things don't eat it. It's more of a dwelling, a cover habitat plant than it is a food plant. Who else do I have in here? In front, I forgot to mention little scabiosa, butterfly blue. This is also called a pincushion plant because it looks kind of like a little pincushion. If you look at the flower, the stamens actually look like little pins stuck in it. Really great for bees and pollinators. They're drawn to that color. Anything that's kind of a blue or purple, that end of the spectrum is very visible by bees. So if you are into drawing more pollinators to your yard, you're not allergic to bees, you're not afraid of bees, that's a great plant to have because it can grow in very hot, dry spots. And it gives you good flowers. That will spread out to form a nice mound, and then you'll find that it drops and reseeds itself pretty readily. And then the other really bee drawer is the Russian sage. Russian sage, if you have a lot of space, go with the native, go with the standard one. It's just regular Russian sage. It can get to be about 4 or 5 feet tall. It can spread like crazy. You'll take over a yard if you let it. If you like Russian sage but you don't have the space, look for the dwarf varieties, lacy blue, little spires. I don't even know what this one is called, but I brought one up. It's probably a lacy blue or one of those. Crazy blue, thank you. So we get a few different dwarf varieties for the people who have smaller yards who still like that plant. Very, very tough plant. Again, don't drown him. Let him dry out. When you're planting a new one, give him a little bit of moisture, get him started. But once he's been in the ground for a couple of months, back off. He likes to drain. You want to get that root structure on it so they can do what it wants to do. And it will reward you with several years coming back. It will die to the ground and go dormant every year. Chop him down, let him come back, blooming on new growth. So again, pruning is almost needed to get the best show. If you're a lazy gardener like I am and you want to let it do its thing, you can actually just step on it and it'll break in the wintertime and then rake it away or let the wind do it. I leave all that stuff down there as mulch because it does break down and kind of insulate the soil. And in Paulden, if you saw my dirt when I started, it was just nothing. There's nothing in it. So I like to add whatever I can, and a lot of I just do kind of that lasagna mulching. I just prune everything down and let it drop to the ground, and then I create the layers of, or the lasagna layers of plant material. Sometimes I'll throw a little layer of mulch on top of that if I don't want to look at all the sticks that I left. But it's a great plant to just break down and let it come back every year as long as it's got some sunlight and some drainage. And then down here in the front is perhaps one of my favorite deciduous trees. This is a desert willow. We have 3 different varieties that we sell here. We have one called Timeless Beauty, which is this one right here. Very low water. It can grow in some of your riparian areas. It'll get larger. The neat thing about Timeless Beauty, though, is it does not produce the seed pods that you would see on the other varieties. So if you're tired of having those big, long bean pods drop to the ground, and you don't want those, Timeless Beauty is the variety for you. It's been bred to give you just as many flowers without the pods. If you don't mind the pods, then the Burgundy Desert Willow or the Burgundy Katy, Sweet Katy is a Burgundy. It's a little bit smaller variety, same good rich color in the flowers, summer blooms, and hummingbirds are drawn to those deep trumpet-shaped flowers. Great plant, full sun again. Most of these natives that I mentioned do like the sunshine. They like low water, good drained soil, and sun. The exception would be those shade plants that I started with, the yew, the osmanthus, false holly, and the lily of the valley, purus. Those guys can grow in the shade without any problem. There are other types of hollies that can grow in the shade. The coral bells, heuchera, I don't know if you've seen that, kind of looks like lettuce. Comes in a variety of colors. It doesn't need the sunlight. It's also very low water, and it's also evergreen. So we do have some things. If you don't want to stay with the standard, ivies and vincas, there are some other really interesting shady plants you can plant out here and not have to worry about them in the water once you get them established. If you've got a sunny spot, the spectrum is much larger to choose from, but there is anything. I mean, if you're looking for something in particular, I want red flowers, I'll find you a plant. I want yellow flowers, I'll find you a plant. I want blue flowers, I'll find you a plant. I want blue foliage. Come on, bring it on, try to trick me. See if I can't find something that'll work for you. We've got some vines that are great. I didn't bring the honeysuckle up, however, it is the #1 performer when it comes to covering a space. You can get honeysuckle from purple flowers to the white and yellow flowers. The white and yellow is found on the halls, and that is the only evergreen honeysuckle for here. If you want it to stay in the wintertime, you need the halls. If you don't mind, then you can go with like Major Wheeler or I'm trying to remember some of the other ones, Sweet Peaches or Peaches and Cream or something like that. They give you good flowers and good foliage production, fast growing, but they will go deciduous. Virginia Creeper is another really nice one if you have a little protection. Great fall color, fast coverage, but again, dormant. It will go dormant. Low water needs is great for those. Cold hardy, they can take some heat. Is there any areas that somebody in specific needs some help with?
Granite boulder.
Okay, his hand was up first, so I'll get him and then I'll get you.
Okay, I have an area that, because it's the drainage for the neighborhood,
Okay,
when we get these inch and a half rains, it turns into a river. It's there for 12 to 24 hours and then it dries out.
okay, so that would be an area for like the desert willow. The desert willow can tolerate that huge amount of volume of water. The sumac can handle that volume of water, but when it dries out, it'll be fine. The other thing I would recommend is maybe throwing out some wildflower seed. If you've noticed along the highways where the water kind of has the berms, the road has the berms and the water collects in there, and now you see all the sunflowers growing along there. There are definite wildflower blends that are going to tolerate certain spots better. Penstemons are going to be better in your spring and in your fall. Your coreopsis and your helianthus and either your sunflowers are going to be more of a summer to later bloom. The Mexican hat is during the heat and the hot. So I would definitely, in that area, I would maybe throw down some aggregate, riprap, whatever you want to kind of control the ground, put some wildflower seed down, and then put a couple specimen plants like a desert willow or sumac. So they'll really suck in that water, but they